Hi and welcome to Module 3. In this module, you're going to learn how to create layouts in Bricks. But before we dig in, I need to explain something. You see, although this is the first video in this module, I'm actually recording it a couple of months after I made the rest of the lessons. At the time I made this module, Bricks only had one means of creating column grid layouts, Flexbox. And that's the method that I use here. Now, Flexbox is totally fine for creating column layouts. And before CSS Grid was invented a few years ago, it was all we had for the job anyway. However, CSS Grid is better suited to creating column grid layouts because that's what it's designed for. The problem is, Bricks didn't have CSS Grid built in when I made this module. In fact, they released support for it just after I finished making it. Such are the perils of teaching software. Now, the upshot is, CSS Grid is better for creating column grid layouts, whereas Flexbox is better suited for aligning individual elements inside a column. An example of that is in a typical site header. So you might want to space your logo and nav menu all the way to the left and right, or align them in all sorts of other ways. Flexbox makes this kind of alignment of content elements inside a column really easy, with one click, without having to deal with columns or grids at all. So at the time Bricks released support for CSS Grid, I added a separate lesson on it at the end of this module, that's lesson 10. My plan then was to re-record the entire module again from scratch using CSS Grid and Flexbox. But after looking at it a bit more closely today, I've decided that actually that is going to be a waste of time. You see, huge parts of this module aren't about layout anyway. They're about building pages with Bricks generally. I just happen to cover layout while we do that. And what you learn about Flexbox in these lessons is going to be so supremely useful. You will learn tons about Flexbox, so you can use it in situations where Flexbox is more appropriate, which is going to be a lot. And also, the basic principle of how you apply Flexbox to elements is the same with CSS Grid as well, as you'll see. So I've decided it's better and actually more valuable for you that I just leave the current module as it is. So here's what I suggest you do. I suggest that you go through the lessons as normal, starting from lesson 1. Once you've watched and completed lesson 3, it's called Introducing Flexbox, I suggest that you then jump and watch the CSS Grid lesson at the end, lesson 10. I'm going to remind you in the notes under lesson 3, don't worry. And after watching the CSS Grid lesson, you can then go back and pick up from lesson 4 and just work through the rest of the module again. And when you follow along, building in your own project, you're just going to use CSS Grid for creating the column grid layouts instead of Flexbox. It's really very easy. It's easier than Flexbox, in fact. As I say, there's way more in these lessons than just creating layouts. Now, there are a couple of lessons in this module where you do still want to use Flexbox because in those 2 lessons, we do align elements inside a column, which is what Flex is best for. Those lessons are lessons 6 and 8. So lessons 6 and 8, you'll actually use Flexbox in those lessons, exactly as I do in the videos. Again, I'm going to remind you in the notes under those lessons. You don't have to remember that now. So just follow along and keep your eye on the notes under the video and I'll guide you what to do. If you have any questions, just email me, support@davefoy.com, and I'll help you out. Thanks, and enjoy building layouts with CSS Grid and Flex.